Welcome to this video. In this session, we're going to go through the process of importing rasters in Google Earth. A raster is just an image, only one that has been embedded with geospatial data, such as the position or rotation of the image in the world, so that it can be georeferenced correctly when you import it in GIS software. Also, a raster can be embedded with other types of geospatial data, such as elevation values. Now, rasters come in many different file formats and extensions, but most commonly you're going to encounter the GeoTIFF type of raster, the extension for which is .tif. Google Earth can load most types of rasters, including GeoTIFF. For the most part, the process of importing a raster in Google Earth is simply to drag and drop it in the viewport, or you could also go under the file menu and use the importing functionality. We're going to go through both processes, and we're also going to talk about the limitations of Google Earth when it comes to loading rasters. I'm going to first of all go through the importing process using the file menu and the import function. So I'm going to click on import. I have here a couple of GeoTIFF rasters, and as you can see, they come with the .tif extension. If it happens that you don't see any rasters in your folder, make sure to change the file type from the bottom right corner to GeoTIFF. I'm going to load the slope.tif just by selecting it and clicking on open. And immediately we're going to be presented with this pop-up dialog box. It's going to ask us to choose one of these four options. If we choose to create a super overlay, instead of loading the entire raster directly and displaying it all at once, Google Earth is going to stream it in pieces, and it's going to ask you to choose a location on your hard drive where you want to save those tiles. So it's basically going to tile the image, and it's going to load tiles of the image as you zoom into certain parts of it. So if I click on Create Super Overlay, it's going to ask me to point to a directory where I want the tiles to be created. So all you have to do is to choose a folder and then click on Select Folder. And now the raster is going to be loaded, and it's going to be streamed from the location on my hard drive. So the file itself is not actually loaded inside of Google Earth. There's just a live link to the raster on my hard drive. And if I go back to the folder that I chose for the tiles to be saved to, you can see that Google Earth created all of these tiles of the raster, and it saved them as a KMZ in this folder. So if I were to, for example, open this tile and load it inside of Google Earth, and I'm going to untoggle the visibility of the main raster, we can see that it's just a small part of the main raster. So super overlays could be very useful if you're struggling to load rasters that are very high resolution or of a very large file size, which may cause Google Earth to either crash, or in some cases it's going to just display a red crosshair, meaning that it cannot load the raster because it is above the threshold of resolution or file size that it can handle. There's also another instance in which Google Earth may display the red crosshair, and that is if the link to the raster has been broken. So it cannot find it on your hard drive, so this is why it's displaying a red crosshair. But in most cases, the red crosshair occurs if Google Earth cannot load the raster because it is above the threshold of the file size or resolution that it can handle. Now, there is some speculation about what exactly is the threshold, and from our experience, I would say is something between 10 to 20,000 pixels wide, and it's also around 500 megabytes of file size. Once you start going above these numbers, Google Earth may start either crashing or displaying the red crosshair. Now, I'm going to import the raster again from the file menu and the import function, and this time we can take a look at the scale option. What this option does is it tells Google Earth to try and scale down the image to the absolute maximum that it can display. So if you're trying to load a very large image, you can also use the scale option, and Google Earth will try to scale the image down so that it doesn't cause any crashes or it doesn't cause the red crosshair to be displayed instead. In most cases, this is the option that you're going to choose. Now, if the image that you're trying to load is below the actual threshold that Google Earth has, then it's not actually going to perform any scaling. It's just going to load the image as it is in its native resolution. So in most cases, this is the option to choose. The super overlay option is useful only if you're trying to load some extremely huge rasters, and even the scaling option is not going to work, because the moment you try to perform any kind of action on the image when you load it, Google Earth just slows down or completely crashes. So you may try to create a super overlay in those cases. But I would say 99% of the time, just use the scale option. And lastly, we have the crop option. If you choose this option, Google Earth is just going to crop the image down to a certain part of it, which has the absolute maximum resolution that Google Earth can support. So for example, if you're trying to load an image that has a resolution of say 50,000 pixels wide, Google Earth is going to crop it down to a segment that is no more than the absolute threshold that it supports, which is around 15,000 pixels. Again, in most cases, we're going to use the scale option, so this is what I'm going to choose in this case. Now, you always have to choose one of these options, or you can just cancel out of the entire process and not import the image, but you always have to choose something if you want to import it. And again, in most cases, we're just going to choose the scale option. So now that I chose the scale option, the image will be imported, and this pop-up window will also appear. From here, you can choose a name for the image. I'm just going to call this slope. And you can also adjust the transparency if you want using the transparency slider. I'm going to delete everything that is under the description tab because I don't need for that text to be there. And I'm just going to press OK on that. And now the image has been imported, and we can see that it's overlaying properly on top of this terrain. Now I have another raster that I want to import, which is a hillshade map, so that I can give this slope map a bit more of a definition. So again, I'm going to go under the file menu and under import, and I'm going to choose the hillshade map and press on open. Again, it's going to ask me to choose one of the three options. I'm just going to choose scale. Now we can see the hillshade map has been loaded. Again, I'm going to delete anything under the description, and I'm going to set a name as hillshade. I'm not going to touch the transparency, I'm just going to press OK. Now at the moment, the hillshade map is overlaying on top of the slope map, but I want it to be the other way around. I want the slope map to be on top of the hillshade map, and for the slope map to have a bit of a transparency so that the hillshade map is showing underneath it. Now Google Earth does not have a layering system as we would normally understand it. That is, it doesn't matter if the slope map is above the hillshade map. So at the moment, the slope map is above the hillshade map in the list of places here, but still the hillshade map is showing above the slope map. So instead of the traditional layering system, Google Earth uses what's called draw orders, and you have to specify those manually. So if we want to have the slope map display above the hillshade map, then the slope map has to have a higher draw order than the hillshade map. And to access the draw order settings, you have to go under the properties of the image. So I'm going to right click on the slope map and go under properties. And under the altitude tab, you're going to find the draw order setting. Now at the moment, the slope map has a draw order of 0 by default, and the hillshade map has the same. So if I set a draw order of 1 for the slope map, we can see that it immediately goes above the hillshade map because it has a higher draw order. Now I want to adjust the transparency a bit. I'm going to set this to something like 60%, and I'm going to press OK so that now we can see a little bit of the hillshade map popping up from underneath. Now, the other way to import rasters in Google Earth is, as we already mentioned, to simply drag and drop them in the viewport. And this is probably how you're going to be importing them most of the time. So I'm going to select both of the maps that I already imported just by holding the Shift button on my keyboard and selecting both of them. Then I'm going to right click and delete both of them, and I'm going to press yes. I'm going to go back to the folder of rasters, and I'm going to select the slope map and just drag and drop it in the viewport. Again, it's going to ask us to choose one of the three options. I'm just going to click on scale. And for a name, I'm going to set slope again. I'll delete anything under the description. I'll set a transparency to something like 60%. And under the altitude tab, I'm going to set a draw order of 1. And I'm just going to press OK on that. Now I'll go back to the folder and I'm going to drag and drop the hillshade map in the viewport. And I'm going to choose scale as one of the options. For a name, I'm going to set hillshade, and I'm going to delete anything under the description. The draw order is going to be 0 by default. Since our slope map has a higher draw order now that I set it to 1, I'm just going to leave this 1 as 0, and I'm going to press OK. So the hillshade map should now be again underneath the slope map. And for the most part, this is it when it comes to importing rasters. Thank you for watching, hope the video was useful, and I'm looking forward to share more with you in the next one.